Stars
Podcast. This is the
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
big one in store for today, folks. So welcome aboard to the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast. Here each Monday and Friday to bring you wrestling reports and recaps on AEW Dynamite, Rampage, NWA Power, weekend shows, pay-per-view events, news coverage, the whole gamut of good stuff. As always, subscriptions are not as important on YouTube in 2022, but I would still appreciate the support from all of you if you could subscribe, click the bell icon to stay notified of when our posts go up, leave a comment, and rate the show for me. Again, that is a Monday and Friday podcast we bring here each week on YouTube and Rumble. As part of our Friday show, we've got the usual Dynamite report to run down, which is always high-quality entertainment on my end. And we also have our retro review series where we look at classic content on the Peacock Network. Specifically, we are in the middle of looking back at NWA World Championship Wrestling from 1986 and World Class Championship Wrestling from 1983. So if that is something you seem on board with and you like classic content reviews, come check out the show each Friday for that. And we will get into the good stuff eventually, but first, we must run down this, whatever in the hell you even call AEW at this point. I don't even know. It is something resembling a pro wrestling show, although I'm not entirely sure about that. I will certainly get into a tangent about it by the end, but for now, let's dive into it. The January 19th edition of AEW Dynamite on the TBS Superstation. So we begin with, let's be honest, pretty much the only thing that mattered on the show, and that was the return of Jon Moxley. And I will say from the jump, if there is one thing that I did not miss in Mox's absence, it was having to hear Justin Roberts do his ring introduction. It was just as annoying 8 or so years ago when he did it with John Cena, and it's just as annoying with Moxley. But I don't want to get hung up on that. The best part of the promo was actually the first line out of Moxley's mouth, trying to deal with the heckler at ringside giving him a hard time. Without skipping a beat, Moxley just goes, "Hey, go fuck yourself. Get that piece of shit out of here." All uncensored, by the way. Wouldn't have expected anything less from him. But it takes a few minutes to share the chain of events that sort of led up to the realization that he had a problem he needed to get fixed. Talks about the fact that we constantly struggle with demons, both from the outside and the inside. But the demons on the inside are the ones that really define our true character at the end of the day. And he kind of does a semi-Sting post-Bash at the Beach promo in 96 where basically talks to the fans and thanks everyone that stuck by him. And for the ones that wrote him off, they can go stick it. And now his mission is to apparently do whatever the fuck he wants. And, I know I briefly touched on this a few months back, right around the point where they had written Mox off of TV for his rehab. I know that I have been very critical of a lot of Moxley's work in AEW these last few months. I have been on record talking about how much of a dud I thought his world title reign was, and granted, a lot of that kind of stems from bad booking more than anything. I still wouldn't say I'm a particular fan of his, and honestly, I probably never will be. I think, for one, AEW has brought to light the kind of wrestler that Jon Moxley has always been, and I'm just not a fan of the whole garbage, hardcore, blood and guts form of wrestling. That said, the one thing I've always appreciated about him is his ability to make his promos impactful. Whether or not he's been able to back it up in the ring is another conversation entirely. But when Moxley's on the stick, I believe that what he says is authentic. I know the Roddy Piper Pillman comparisons sort of date back to his time in WWE, but I really don't think those comparisons are that far off, especially when it comes down to promo work. And I am interested to see what they do with him. Part of me would kind of be intrigued to see him work a program with guys like CM Punk or Bryan Danielson down the line, just to see how Mox would vibe with those guys in an AEW role. I know right before he left, they were kind of teasing the heel turn with him, and, obviously that's probably out of the equation for the time being, but I guess we'll see what they have in line for him. I'm just keeping my fingers crossed it's not garbage, and for the love of God, keep him away from Jericho. We had a very tense pre-tape with MJF and Wardlow in the back, basically with MJF taking every pot shot he could to undermine Wardlow. But since it's Wardlow's birthday, MJF is going to offer a sincere apology to Wardlow as a gift for flying off the handle last week. And because MJF is a great douchebag heel, and he actually knows how to work his role effectively, he still won't let Wardlow off the hook for getting physical with him last week. So he will deduct Wardlow's next paycheck, and if he starts racking up wins and manages to get MJF the TNT Championship, he will consider bumping up his pay again. And I'm telling you, man, you want to talk about a real Dynamite moment to look forward to in the coming year? When that Wardlow MJF split finally happens, if they don't fuck it up, keyword if, it's going to be electric. I reserve judgment on that because you never know with AEW. But that is something down the pike that I am actually looking forward to see how it pays off. But as expected, the Moxley return was, in fact, the best part of the show, and that left approximately 115 minutes in the show for, well, the usual fuckery I'd come to expect out of AEW at this stage. We got this wretched Adam Cole, Britt Baker versus Orange Cassidy, Chris Statlander mixed tag, and I think using the word wretched might still be too complimentary. The only thing I could think the entire time this match is going on, can we get a fucking Kyle O'Reilly singles match on this show? Or God forbid, maybe get Red Dragon in some squash matches on television? No, of course we can't get that. Because we still need to get the company mascot forcibly shoved up our rectum every week. Now you see why I reserve the right to credit AEW for bringing in talent. Because the majority of the time they have anything at their fingertips that could conceivably be good, they manage to screw it up. See Kyle O'Reilly showing up and immediately getting saddled in a program with the best friends. It is also official after having watched the face-off between the two. Chris Statlander does in fact have more muscle mass than Adam Cole. And actually, the only thing that I wanted to see for real here is having Statlander actually get into a physical altercation with Cole and kick his ass, because it is actually a rare circumstance in pro wrestling where I could totally believe that the female would dominate and overpower the male athlete. So, of course, they didn't do it. This was also the match that would not end if you shot it point blank with a fucking pistol. It went about a month. They did 1,400 back and forth near falls, each of which got more infuriating as they went along, yet they still have to do it in every match. The camera shot where Adam Cole hits the big move, gets the near fall, and then does the jaw agape, I can't believe he kicked out facial. And if you think I'm wrong about that, go back and watch every Adam Cole match since he debuted in AEW. I guarantee you he does it in every fucking match. And, course, Cassidy did his usual dumb antics, which don't need any further elaborating on at this point. And the finish to this incredibly stupid match is Cole and Britt going to set up a table on the outside. Again, because remember, people, the rules in AEW are that you can use tables in normal matches, and it won't get you disqualified. You can also run blatant interference in the ring, but as long as you don't get physical with the wrestlers involved in the match, totally fine. So anyway, the spot is Britt getting inadvertently bumped from Cassidy on the apron. She takes the lamest pratfall through the table imaginable. This evidently kills Britt on the spot. And, well, apparently this was such a concerning moment that not only did they send the medical team out there to check on Britt's dead body, but Adam Cole was so enraged with Cassidy knocking his girlfriend through a table on the outside that he hits Cassidy with the boom, and he yells for the referee to come in and count the fall. Yes, Adam Cole was so pissed about his girlfriend getting hurt that it was ever so important that he got the pinfall in this match. And this also led to Cole making the announcement that he wants a lights out, anything goes, no DQ match with Orange Cassidy on next week's Beach Break episode. Because we don't get those matches every fucking week on this program, right? You know, 1 year ago at this point, I never would have thought it would even cross my mind to change my opinion on Adam Cole. But whatever lightning in the bottle Triple H caught with Cole in NXT the last several years, it's gone. Adam Cole is the epitome of a total jag on this show. And seriously, if the rumor is true that Adam Cole's the guy next in line to face Hangman Page for the world title after Lance Archer, God shoot me now. We had some drama with Chris Jericho and PNP backstage. Really didn't write a whole lot down about it, other than the fact that it is another angle where tag partners aren't getting along. I guess Tony's been watching some old Nitro clips from back in the early 2000s. We got CM Punk versus Shawn Spears, and it went about as perfectly as they could have booked it. Shawn Spears sucks, so Punk killed him with a GTS in like 8 seconds, and that immediately leads to MJF running down to try and get the jump on Punk, but Punk catches him, grabs a handful of his scarf, and MJF bails before Punk can lay a hand on him. Easiest paycheck pickup for Punk so far in AEW. Flew himself all the way to DC for an 8-second TV match and getting a hold of MJF's gimmick. Yep. Somehow they're going to try and stretch this thing out for the next 2 months before we get to the Revolution pay-per-view. Good luck, guys. Good luck. We had our vintage AEW beatdown session in the back with the Gun Club jumping Christian Cage to apparently set up the Jurassic Express versus the Gun Club. I also took note of Billy Gunn's pink loafers in this segment. High comedy. And apparently this really is the most simplified version of AEW setting up programs. Just have guys jump dudes in the back for no reason and follow that up with 7 to 28 weeks of nonstop TV matches. And more backstage brawling. At this point, we had Cody Rhodes come out, struggling greatly to get this ladder out from under the ring during the break, which I found funny. And when we come back, Cody dives into his typical overly rehearsed, scripted out verbiage. And that is not me drawing that conclusion, people. That is directly from the episode of Roads to the Top I watched several months ago, where Cody outright went through the process of how he comes up with promo material for this show. He sits in the back with a notepad, jots some lines down, practices it in front of a mirror because Cody worked in WWE for most of his life, and he just doesn't have the ability to shoot from the hip. because everything must sound like a drama performance class. And after about 10 minutes of his usual WWE scripted out verbiage, talking about the CM Punk work shoot pipe bomb, which is probably the most over-referenced, overrated thing people still talk about to this day, and he essentially gets to the point that he wants Sammy Guevara in a ladder match next week to determine the real TNT champion. That took me approximately 2 minutes to report. It took Cody an hour. Everything in Cody's promos, there's no other way to put it. There's a deliberate effort to take any shot at WWE that he can find, whether or not it's even called for to begin with. It's like, I'm sitting here watching Cody Rhodes try to hype up a ladder match with him and Sammy Guevara for the real TNT title. And I'm sitting there watching Cody talk about Red Dragon graduating from developmental hip toss class, joking about WWE rebranding Walter's ring name, referencing Punk's pipe bomb promo on Raw from over 10 years ago. Just like, how in the fuck is any of this designed to get me to want to see Cody and Sammy for the TNT title? How hard is it for Cody to just go out there, call bullshit on Tony Khan making a stupid decision to crown an interim TNT champion when Cody was only gone for, 2 weeks? How about Cody explain why he's the real champion and Sammy's just a paper champion who capitalized on an opportunity because he knew deep down that he couldn't straight up beat Cody for the belt? But no. Of course, I should probably know better with Cody at this point. He's got to act on this wrestling show. Because that's what Cody wants to be. He wants to be a TV star. He wants to be a C-level actor. This whole thing was so stupid. So then we got Sauron and Morgoth against the Varsity Blondes. And they also still have Julia Hart accompanying Griffin Pillman ringside, still sporting the eye patch. So at this point, the only thing they're really telegraphing is that she's turning heel once she takes the eye patch off. And if you can't see that coming a mile away, you obviously don't understand pro wrestling. Anyway, the match goes 2 minutes. The entire story of the match is that Pillman Jr. apparently forgot how to work. So the heels did some choppy offense, nearly botched their finishing move on Pillman and won. Seriously, if that's going to be their finisher going forward, they either need to practice that move a lot or just come up with another finisher, because they're like one split second away from dropping a dude straight on top of his neck, and I don't need to see that. And then after the match, Pac showed up on the monitor and pledged death on Malachi and Brody. Somewhere in here, we got Roppongi Vice setting up a match with the Beta Bucks for Rampage. So that's something I've looked forward to on Rampage. Another no-sell flip-flop gymnast session with the Bucks reliving an old Japan rivalry. Then we got Frankie Kazarian versus Lance Archer. Oh, no, wait. I'm sorry. I meant to say Frank E. Kazarian. Not that it matters. They had a relatively boring extended squash. I don't really know why it takes Archer 10 plus minutes to beat Kaz, especially if he's challenging for the AEW World title. Also, Dan Lambert is now Archer's mouthpiece. Reason? Who knows? Probably because Jake Roberts isn't in good health, so they need an excuse to stick Archer with another manager that'll be on TV consistently. And after Archer won with the blackout, he tried to take out Frankie on the ramp, and that is when Hangman Page ran out to make the save and left the big man stumbling. And that's probably the most effective thing that they have done with Page since winning the belt, and actually trying to semi-present him like a badass, having him knock the big guy off his feet and standing his ground. Certainly won't complain about that, even though the match was a snooze fest. Dante Martin is apparently back with Matt Sydal now, because I guess Leo Rush decided to retire again. What a fucking pussy that guy is. Layla Hirsch got into a brawl with Red Velvet and Chris Statlander. Again, a feud that was entirely spent developing on AEW Dark. And because I don't watch Dark, and I have not been given a reason to care why Layla and Chris are not friends now, I did not care about this. We got Sky Blue versus Serena Deeb, which was alright, I guess. Not really sure what the point of it was, other than giving Serena a TV win. And on Too Much Shit Going On Wrestling, it was probably a good 5 minutes that would have been better devoted to previous segments. To me, it just kind of felt like Damage Control. Like, Tony Khan woke up last week and realized, oh fuck, Serena's actually a talented wrestler, but she's been booked like garbage because we keep beating her. Let's give her a TV win. You're about 6 months too late to the party on that one, Tony, but better late than never, I guess. We got Ethan Page doing a promo, calling out Tony Khan to put him in a big spot to prove himself. So, of course, he gets booked in a match to be killed by Jon Moxley on Friday. Poor guy. Something with Matt Hardy and Andrade joining forces to create a mega organization now known as AHFO. AKA, here's a bunch of guys on the roster that we don't know what to do with, so instead of cutting their contracts and trying to save up money for other things, we will keep them all around and just cram everyone into a mega group of bodies, where nobody stands out and nobody gets over. Remember when people thought Andrade was going to make a world of difference in AEW? That cooled off real fast, didn't it? And the main event of the show is the Acclaimed taking on Sting and Darby Allin. Max Caster made a reference to Sting's out-of-shape physique from Starrcade 97, to which I immediately retorted with, yup, and he still probably looked better than most of the guys working the indie circuit today. There's a stiff arm for you. So they do the big injury spot right at the beginning, where Darby gets taken out by the medical team after having been driven throat first into the ring post with a folding chair wrapped around his neck, thus forcing Sting to wrestle in a handicap match. So, of course, Sting immediately kicks the heel's asses 2-on-1, no problem. And once we got the Acclaim getting the heat on Sting, I pretty much wrote down, they proceeded to have about the safest heat session they could with a 60-year-old wrestler, which actually allowed for the match to breathe for a change. Go figure. And they all built up to the big spot where Caster and Bowens tried to take out Sting on the outside using the steps, but Darby comes in from out of nowhere and kills the heels with a dive. Literally from out of nowhere. We also had the vintage Sting suicide dive here, because the man is destined to die on live national television just to prove that he can still go. And I'm still not even entirely sure what the plan was when he did this dive onto Caster. There was a table set up underneath the stage, so I think the idea was that Sting was supposed to do like a cross-body dive and put Caster through the table coming down. It failed. And that led to Darby hitting Bowens with the stun gun stunner deal, put him away with the coffin drop for the 3. It was pretty much every smoke and mirrors Sting match you'd come to expect by now. Was not bad, but the novelty is starting to wear off, if you know what I mean. The few times we do see Sting work, it's usually a lot of fun, but there's only so many ways he can mask the fact that he's really not that good anymore. And I know it's probably all setting up to them going after the tag strap soon. God almighty, Sting wrestling Jungle Boy and the Luchasaurus. That sounds disastrous. Could have been worse, though. It could have tried to put him in there with the Lucha Bros. Again, though, I like seeing Sting in moderation, but this is probably the first time watching a Sting match in AEW where, when it was over, I really didn't get all that much out of it. I would have preferred they'd have stuck with what they were doing initially with Darby and, trying to push him as a singles guy with Sting kind of playing the background peripheral muscle. But Sting and Darby going after the tag belts, only to probably end up losing to the Jurassic Express in the end. Nah, I'm good, dog. Don't really need to see that. Much like I really don't need to see most of the stuff on this bullshit program every week. It's like I said at the beginning, man. And I just knew it would ring true when the show was over. The best thing about the show was the Moxley return promo. And it was the first 5 minutes out of a 2-hour show surrounded by nothing but either bad comedy or low-quality television. There's a few blips of good moments here and there, like the stuff with Punk, MJF, and Wardlow is good. But I know for a fact that there have been a lot of people out there saying that with the way that program's been booked recently, people are sort of souring on Punk versus MJF, and they're more intrigued with MJF versus Wardlow. Think about how badly you have to suck at your job as a booker when you got CM Punk in a top program with MJF, and you are doing everything in your power to get people less interested in Punk working that program, mostly using him as a bit player to advance another program involving MJF. That is a level of skill that only our almighty Booker of the Year can achieve. And again, I don't want to go back to the well with it again because I say this all the time when I talk about this show. And I even know it's going to turn out that way when they run down the card for the night. There's too much shit going on week after week after week after week after week on this show. There's trying to create a jam-packed, all-action-based show. And then there's the WCW Nitro approach where you just throw a bunch of shit out there, everything feels rushed, nothing gets the chance to breathe, and it's just 2 straight hours of non-stop stuff. That's really what AEW feels like at this point. It's a bunch of stuff happening. It's a bunch of stuff getting rammed down my throat every week. Most of it's garbage, a lot of it gets lost in the shuffle, and I can't keep track of anything that's going on. Your world champion feels like a complete afterthought. Jon Moxley's big return after 3 months of absence. He gets less than 10 minutes of camera time. They couldn't even do something shocking like have him work the main event match with Sting to sub as Darby's partner. That was a completely missed opportunity there. Can you imagine the pop that would have gotten if Moxley would have come out to sub? And above all that, your top program right now, what should be your top program with MJF versus CM Punk, and it feels like a side sampler before getting to the feud that everyone wants to see, which is MJF versus Wardlow. And then, of course, you have everything else that's going on, most of which sucks. Are we catching on yet? Are we starting to realize how not good this show is? Are we starting to finally jump off the AEW bandwagon after 2 years? Realizing that this company has a lot of problems that need addressing. I know we all really want to live in a bubble that AEW can do no wrong and everything this company does is sunshine and rainbows, but Jesus Christ, people, look at the shows that these people have been putting on the last 2 months. They suck. They're terrible. They got 1, maybe 2 things worth noting and a bunch of other random chaotic garbage going on. How do you do that? How do you have a roster assembly in the triple fucking digits and you have, I can count on one hand the amount of people that I like seeing on the show consistently. They got too many damn people under contract, too many cooks in the kitchen making decisions. They have no idea what they're building toward. And it shows every time I watch. What they need is an experienced agent to lay out the show for them to try to come up with a better way for them to handle time management. Because that's probably the biggest flaw I see with Dynamite and Rampage right now. Their time management sucks. And y'all can talk about Crash TV this and ECW this, but newsflash, folks, reality check, knock on the door here. ECW's dead, and it's been dead for over 20 years. And if AEW is going to be counterculture to WWE, there are plenty of effective methods that they can adopt that don't have to come from failed business models from over 20 years ago, especially when the business was in a different place at that time. I mean, at least the Rampage lineup has Jon Moxley on it, so that's at least one semi-bigger star that they've got booked for the show. Still no sign of CM Punk or Bryan Danielson on that show, but what can you do? I'll keep my hopes up for Friday, although with AEW I probably should just concede defeat, but I still want to be cautiously optimistic for some reason. But that is why we have the retro review series as part of the Friday podcast, because I always know that it's a good detox from anything that's talk of AEW. So, moving right along with the show here, let's talk about this January 18th, 1986 episode of World Class Championship Wrestling from the Superstation. They open the show with another airing of the Rock and Roll Midnight Express tennis racket angle, with Ricky getting dropped throat first on the gimmick. And if you recall from last week's show, that evidently led to one of the worst bits of TBS Superstation programming, where they allowed Robert Gibson to cut a promo for more than 15 seconds. And it was just as bad as it sounds. And while we did get a rock and roll match this week, thankfully they did away with the promo segment, especially with Ricky still selling the damaged trachea, or windpipe, or whatever he's supposed to be selling. Opening match is Ron Garvin versus Pablo Crenshaw. Here's a chant that you will probably never hear in the business again. Beat 'em up, Garvin, beat 'em up. Clap, clap. Fans had such class back in the day. The only thing of note I wrote down in this match is the early part of the match where Ronnie Garvin... There's no other way of putting it, folks. Sorry for the graphic details. Ron was rubbing his junk on Crenshaw's neck. And if you think I'm kidding about that, go watch the match for yourself. After you see it, you will never unsee it. I have no explanation for it, and honestly, I'm sure if you asked Ronnie Garvin in person, he'd probably have no idea what the fuck he was trying to accomplish with that move either. But aside from that, not really anything else to note about it. That is immediately followed with Ronnie at the booth for a promo. And if there is one thing worse about hearing Ronnie Garvin try to cut an ordinary promo on this show, it is hearing Ronnie Garvin try to cut a promo when he's sucking wind after having worked a match. Best line in the entire thing is when Ronnie went, "I have a lot of fans, and you used to have a lot of fans too, Ric Flair. That was until you became a... well, I can't say it on TV." You cannot say the word sellout. Ivan Koloff wrestled Benny Traylor, a moderately boring match which mostly consisted of Ivan dumping Benny out of the ring consistently. There was also a point in this match where Ivan gave Traylor an Irish whip off the rope and followed it up with what I think was supposed to be a knee to the gut. It more so looked like Ivan was going to scratch his leg, and Benny sort of bumped into his knee coming off the ropes. They had also made mention during this segment the fact that Crusher Khrushchev was injured in last week's match. Therefore, the six-man tag team championship trophy gimmick is at grave risk. And we would have more to come on that later in the program, but that was something I had initially wondered when that Khrushchev-Houston match was over with last week, because I remember Khrushchev was really selling the leg in that match toward the end, and now I'm starting to wonder if he actually did get hurt for real. Because with what happens later in the show with Baron Von Raschke showing up, I remember he ends up sticking around with the Russians throughout a good chunk of 86, so maybe Khrushchev actually did get hurt in that match, and they brought in Baron to cover up as the replacement in the interim. Probably should have looked that up before the podcast, but that is a very interesting story. Jimmy Valiant did a quick promo with the booth on Tully Blanchard and J.J. Dillon, the bulk of which consisted of him saying that he's not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but he knows how to throw down. And that led to Jimmy Valiant taking on my newest favorite jobber on this show. Gotta remember this guy. The Golden Terror. The best masked job guy in the history of the business. Him and Tony Zane need to link up as a team to create the ultimate job squad. Typical Valiant match with him using every heel tactic in the book to win, yet the people still cheer for him like he's God. He ended up going over with the elbow drop, which, when you actually watch Valiant execute this wacky elbow smash on camera, I honestly don't know how the guy doesn't pull a hip or something. The effort this man takes to execute a single elbow drop, what with basically gyrating and wiggling his entire upper body, it is amazing this guy never hurt himself pulling this move off. So coming up right after that, we got Ric Flair at the booth to talk about, pretty much the only two words in Flair's dictionary: money and fucking. He mentions that he had sex with hotter girls at Hotel Paradise, none of whom looked like anyone in the studio this evening, to which, as always, they pan the cameras on all of the women in the crowd, most of whom are either laughing or smiling like they have no idea what's going on. And he tells Ronnie Garvin to always remember that when you get on Space Mountain, it is always easier to get off than it is to get on. So is that a volunteer for Ronnie Garvin to try and ride Space Mountain with Ric Flair? Gay. Up next, we got the Russians at the booth. Nikita standing there with the Sports Illustrated magazine, talking about the Sports Athlete of the Year. Claims that because of prejudice and bias against the Russians, of course, they picked the American as the Athlete of the Year over a Russian. And somewhere in this promo segment, Paul Jones showed up and offered Baron von Raschke's services to the Russians to defend the six-man tag team trophy. And Nikita also tried to chime in with something else, but Tony basically said, "No, dude, fuck off. We got a match to get to." So we get Baron von Raschke in a match against, speak of the devil, Tony Zane. God, poor Tony Zane. Must have been in the doghouse for this one. That said, Baron had probably the safest match he could possibly muster up with Tony here, and I'm still almost positive that Tony may have broken 2 or 3 bones during the span of this 2-minute match. Of course, Baron ends up going over with the claw submission, and that immediately leads to him joining the Russians at the booth to inform the babyfaces on the roster that if they step up to the plate against the Russians, doom is their ultimate fate. And that is all you need to know. I also got a laugh out of Baron's line in here, referring to the Road Warriors as the Road Runners. And he was so proud of this line that he started laughing with all his goofball heels at the booth. And of course, Tony Schiavone, the most epic performer on this entire show, totally stone-faced. And I'll tell you one thing for sure, man. There are definitely those types of guys throughout wrestling history where you could listen to a promo from them blindfolded and you know instantly who the guy cutting the promo is. Baron von Raschke, you could play a promo segment from him in any era, be it the AWA, the NWA, any town or territory he was working with throughout his career. That voice is clearly distinguishable and unforgettable. Coming back from the break, we get Sam Houston taking on Art Pritz. I can unashamedly say that when I saw the graphic read Sam Houston versus Art Pritz, my body immediately gave me the sign that it was time for a potty break. So I do apologize that I cannot provide an in-depth analysis on Sam Houston versus Art Pritz. But I imagine it was just as uneventful as the graphic made it sound on screen. I did, however, come back in time to catch Dusty's promo. The only thing of note I took away from was the fact that Dusty and Baby Doll were apparently going to take a bubble bath together. And I also got a laugh out of Dusty reminiscing about his recent trip with Baby Doll in the Himalayas, where they were 25,000 feet in the air on a yak. And hearing Dusty utter the phrase yak several times over was high comedy. We had the Barbarian taking on, I think, the debuting Ray Taylor, a.k.a. Big Bubba Rogers, a.k.a. Big Boss Man. A very green Big Boss Man, I should also point out. And fast forward like 3 years when he wound up in WWF, he was a totally different performer. In fact, it was not too far off from that where he was main eventing against Hulk Hogan. So now we've got a trailer and a Taylor that I need to keep track of on this show in squash matches. And goddamn it all, we're debuting Ray Taylor on this show. We must have this go through a commercial break. Gotta make the Barbarian work for the win this week. This match also had a classic David Crockett moment where him and Tony are casually talking amongst each other, calling the action, and from out of nowhere, Barbarian gives Taylor a massive body slam. And folks, again, sorry to be vivid here with the description, but there's no other way to put it. When Barbarian power slammed Taylor, David Crockett reached peak climax in the nether regions. The level of excitement in the air when Barbarian got the big man up, it was too much for Crockett to contain. He let it all out. And then Barbarian won with a diving headbutt. Again, I reiterate, this went through a commercial. I guess it was all important to protect Ron Taylor. Or Ray, whatever the fuck his name is, who cares? Big Boss Man. Then we get Magnum TA against, not making this name up, this is legendary, Lee Peak. And Magnum was so ashamed of this man's ring name that he took the get in and get out approach this week, killed this guy with a belly-to-belly in a minute, didn't even give Lee the time of day. Why would you? If I'm on this show and I'm told that I'm wrestling Lee Peak, you bet your ass I'm going in there and beating the fuck out of that dude, taking my paycheck and going home. So following that, we had kind of a bizarre random medical update on Dusty Rhodes' ankle. And just to give you a brief backstory on it, if y'all remember, toward the tail end of 85, the central story on the show was all focused around Dusty selling his bad ankle after having been destroyed by the Horsemen. And they had gone through the whole deal where his doctors had customized a steel toe boot for Dusty so that he could still wrestle while he was recovering from the injury. But they had Tony talk with, I think, who ended up being Dusty's personal doctor, kayfabe. But he let everyone know that Dusty's gone through all protocol, all the usual testing, and his ankle is fully recovered now. So this leads to the following segment with Arn Anderson in the booth, basically calling bullshit on the whole situation. He's talking about the fact that Dusty's been fully cleared, which means that he doesn't need to be wrestling with the customized steel toe boot. And as far as Anderson is concerned, Dusty's still wrestling with the boot when he doesn't need it, automatically equates to Dusty wrestling with a blatant gimmick, to which I responded with, well, if we are being fair and unbiased, yeah, Arn's kind of right. Dusty is essentially using a weapon in his matches if he has no medical reason to wear the custom boot now. So, heel logic equates to rational thinking on this wrestling show. Yet somehow Dusty's supposed to be the babyface, and Arn is supposed to be the heel. You go figure that one out. And Arn basically concluded with promising that when him and Dusty get in the cage, it is lights out for Dusty. Had the Rock and Roll Express taking on Jeremy Garman and Larry Clark. Seriously, who the fuck are these random new job guys they're bringing in? Do they build like a prototype power plant training center and just go down there one day, bring back 7 or 8 guys and be like, all right, guys, time to go out there and get killed on live national television? I have to imagine that Lee Peak was a total rib on their part. Probably like, son, what's your name? Lee Peak. Perfect. You're hired. Oh yeah, and the Rock and Roll 1, if in case you needed clarification on that. This was followed by a not too happy Jim Cornette, who was complaining about receiving hate mail from all the young female teeny boppers who were apparently all mopey-eyed that Corny in the Midnight had hurt Ricky Morton and injured his larynx. And if there's one thing that is oddly humorous with hearing Cornette rant on the show, it is hearing him screaming and cutting promos on a bunch of adolescent teenage girls. But that bled into the Midnight Express squash match against... I know one of the guys was Bill Tabb. The other guy I didn't even bother writing down. And this was another one of those Midnight Express matches where the sole highlight is Jim Cornette going back and forth between ringside and the commentary booth to cut promos. Aside from that, really nothing else to add here, other than the usual good teamwork with Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey, which is a no-brainer. Just another classic example of clearly the only tag team in the modern era of pro wrestling that actually watched and studied these guys is FTR, because they're the only team that actually work effective tag matches these days and actually bother to play by the rules. And again, they're supposed to be heels. Tully Blanchard versus Gene Ligon. In the highlight of this segment taking place with JJ cutting a heat promo on Baby Doll, informing everyone that she's too fat to mount a yak. I had a relatively good howl at that statement. All it needed was Scott Steiner coming out and just simplifying everything with going, she's fat!
He's fat!
This was also apparently the show where guys' go-to spot in their matches was, let me just toss the guy out on the concrete every minute or so. I think out of the... How many matches did we get on this show? I think it was 10, right? I think at least 6 of them had spots where guys got dumped out on the floor. So at this point in the show, we got probably what most would consider the big featured angle. It begins with them re-airing footage of the Ric Flair-Ronnie Garvin title match from the December 28th TV show. And of course, Ronnie's at the booth cutting a promo on Flair, essentially saying that everyone knows he had Flair beat. And that eventually leads to Flair coming out and getting in a heated face-off with Ronnie. And he ends up sucker punching Ronnie and dropping him. So they both get into the ring and get into a brawl with Flair laying Ronnie out with his shoe. Ends up doing the famous sit-down pose on top of Ronnie's dead body in his fucking red dress pants, which is just phenomenal. I should also mention that during the course of this ring brawl, Flair also killed one of the Jeffers brothers and tossed him out of the ring. I don't know why I found that so funny, but it was. Probably because it's the Jeffers, and they're so easy to make fun of on this show because they're just two interchangeable job guys. But things did not stop there, because Flair tries to bask in his glory by making a mockery of Ronnie, and that leads to Ronnie jumping in and decking Flair from behind to take him out. I also think that David Crockett got caught in the line of fire there and went down momentarily. So Ronnie brings Flair back into the ring. Beatdown session continues. This evidently leads to the Horsemen coming in to try and restrain Ronnie so that Flair can put him out again. And that is when all the babyfaces clear the locker room and help out Ronnie. Dusty, of course, out there in his good sweater, fighting Arn, which is just great. And this all leads to another legendary moment here, wherein amidst this pandemonium and chaos, Garvin decks Flair with a knockout punch off camera, intentionally filmed, I might add. And the lasting image of the segment is Ronnie and the Faces doing a promo at the booth, while Flair is sprawled out in dead man's position in the ring, having taken the blow from the hands of Stone. And that leads to some great story follow-up coming over the next few shows, which we will surely get into. And I should also note that because this show had one big brawl segment, and not fucking 8 or 9 in succession, the Flair-Ronnie segment actually stood out as the best part of the show. If this would have happened on an episode of Dynamite, it probably would have just been another uneventful, forgettable part of the show. But on this show, not only was it the highlight of the entire night, but it also had 2 great moments. Flair sitting on Garvin in the ring, and Flair taking the knockout punch from Garvin off camera, and it had a major story development that was basically built around the next several shows. And it was also followed with the Horsemen all coming out to the booth to basically threaten the baby faces and guarantee that they're going to get their hands on them by hook or by crook. Then we had Nikita Koloff versus Mac Jeffers in the main event. So I presume Mac was fine to wrestle after having been killed by Flair just a minute ago. Or maybe that was Jim. Well, whichever brother it was, he got killed anyway. This honestly just kind of seemed like pointless placeholder stuff. Not that watching Nikita kill dudes isn't always entertaining. But when it was over, they cut to the booth for a final Russians promo. And before they end the show, David Crockett is giddy with excitement to see a replay of Flair getting his clock cleaned by Ronnie Garvin. And they go to the replay one last time to see Ronnie giving Flair the knockout punch, probably giving David another chance to orgasm on live camera. And that is how the show went off air. I will say this in closure. The brawl segment with Ronnie and Flair was fantastic. And like I said, it leads to some great story follow-up on the subsequent shows. As for everything else, well, at least we got some new fresh jobbers in the equation. Hopefully we see more of Lee Peak in weeks to come. What a classic stupid jobber name. Still not as bad as Braun Breaker, but it's up there. It's actually amazing to me that, in a 90-minute show, they're still able to fit 10 squash matches in that hour time frame. And they still have enough time for video packages and promos. Probably helps that the squashes don't go more than 5 minutes apiece, but still, that's impressive. 10 squashes in 90 minutes. But there was other good stuff on the show, too, and God, you can already see things really picking up with the show in terms of star power. The new insertions of guys like the Midnight Express, the Road Warriors, elevating guys like Ronnie Garvin and Magnum TA up the card. Obviously the Horsemen and JJ are in full effect now. Dusty's great on the show. The Rock and Roll and the Russians are riding high. It's the one thing that makes this era of NWA wrestling truly remarkable. The star power is impeccable. Even if the show has its dull moments from time to time and most of the squashes are boring as fuck, it's really hard to hate the show when you've got this level of talent strewn throughout. And by the way, I did take note of the fact that there was no second scouting report session with Bill Apter this week. Guess that was a trial and error process that they quickly did away with. I didn't realize it flopped so hard the first time around. I just figured this was going to be a constant with the show, but nope, one and done. Didn't work out. It's unfortunate. So moving along to World Class Championship Wrestling from January 22nd, 1983. And of course, we're still at the point where we are mostly centered on the fallout to the Flair-Kerry cage match from the Christmas Star Wars show. And that was the main point of focus for plot development this week. But before we really delve into story follow-up, we get a re-airing of the Kevin Von Erich versus King Kong Bundy American Heavyweight Championship match from the Christmas Star Wars show. And I know I've been over this. I don't know, probably a good 7 or 8 times since we started recapping these world-class shows, but Kevin Von Erich, man. You want to talk about the perfect body type that all wrestlers should aspire to have. Kevin Von Erich in 1983 should be the poster cover for anyone and everyone training to get in shape. I'm particularly looking at you, Adam Cole. And the great thing about a guy like Kevin is that, unlike the old WWF model of the chiseled, jacked up bodybuilder types, the Hulk Hogans, the Ultimate Warriors, the Lex Lugers, the Billy Grahams, etc., Kevin Von Erich wasn't a 6'7", 275, 280-pound guy. Granted, he was probably slightly taller than your average guy, probably 6'2", 6'3", probably 220 pounds. But, especially in an era of wrestling now where the smaller, shorter guys are sort of the constant when it comes to body types, the Kevin Von Erich swimmer's body is not an impossible feat to attain. What a great athlete that guy was. Kind of makes me wish I'd have actually watched that match and reviewed it along with the Flair Kerry Cage match from the pay-per-view. But it was a fun little title match. Basic with Bundy controlling a lot of the offense early on, tossing Kevin outside the ring and preventing him from getting back in. And everything builds to the climax point in the match where Kevin goes up to try and give Bundy a big move from the top rope, but Bundy pulls David Manning in front to take the blow, and Bundy dumps Kevin over the top rope behind Manning's back, and once Manning sort of regains his composure, he throws the match out and grants Kevin the win via DQ. And Mercer sold it great on commentary too by initially pointing out that the DQ came after Manning had caught Bundy dumping Kevin over the top rope. But in fact, it turns out that the DQ finish came in because Manning realized that Bundy had deliberately yanked him in the line of fire to take the bump from Kevin. Because at one point in the business, for those of you that may not remember this growing up, wrestling officials used to actually be competent. They actually used to enforce and call matches like rules mattered worth a damn. Nowadays, referee jobs are the easiest fucking gig in the world. You show up to work, you jerk off in the ring while guys do a bunch of random spots, and when someone's shoulders are getting pinned, you count them down. It's the easiest high five, low six-figure income you could probably ask for. Also, I should point out, back in a time when babyfaces and heels were actually booked like traditional babyfaces and heels, and if the heel did something underhanded or dastardly in front of the official, he would actually get punished for it. It's like people used to know how to do this shit right back in the day. So diving into the first part of the Christmas Star Wars story follow-up, Kerry and Mercer have a sit-down where Kerry basically spends a few minutes trying to make sense of the whole situation. He admits to the fact that he has not seen any of the video footage up until now. So as they play the highlights of the match, Kerry is sharing his insight on everything, most of which is chalked up to him saying Michael Hayes had no business doing what he did, and everything Hayes did was uncalled for. And the best part of this interview coming from Kerry when he rewatches the spot of getting the cage door slammed into his head, and like a total white meat, clean-cut babyface, Kerry just goes, "Son of a gun." Even Kerry Von Erich, frustrated and angry and irate at everything that transpired at the pay-per-view, getting screwed out of the NWA World's Heavyweight title after having promised his mama and his pa that he was going to get the job done. Even Kerry Von Erich just couldn't muster up the ability to say the word bitch on camera. What a good man. But he does make a promise that when he gets either Terry or Michael in the ring, he's going to, and I quote, cripple them. There's a politically incorrect word in 2022 that people would get canceled for saying in public. Following that, we get Brian Adius versus Terry Gordy. And again, going back to how things used to be in the business when heels and babyfaces worked and acted like actual heels and faces, the entire story of the match was Terry Gordy, the heel, playing chicken shit and constantly looking over his shoulder at Kerry Von Erich, who was standing in Adias' corner for the entire match. Terry Gordy would lock up with Adias, and he'd turn to look over and make sure Kerry wasn't about to hit or jump him in the ring. And then Terry would give Adias an arm drag or a hip toss, and then he'd quickly peer back over to check where Kerry was. Because you knew, or at least you were given the idea, that if given the opportunity to strike, Kerry Von Erich would absolutely hit the ring and beat the ever-loving shit out of Terry Gordy. I sure as hell believed it watching the match. And of course, the match chugs along. Terry's still wrestling very cautiously. And eventually, Michael Hayes makes his way through the crowd, and Kerry catches him from across the other end of the building. And things eventually lead to Kerry giving chase to Michael around ringside. They end up spilling into the ring. David Manning's in there trying to separate everyone and get Kerry back to his corner. And eventually Hayes makes for the hills and bails out while Kerry stands his ground. And all of this confusion leads to the finish where Terry takes advantage of Adius, who had his back turned to the action, spikes him with a sit-out pile driver, which Mercer refers to as an atomic drop. And for reasons that are still unknown to me, Adius still kicked out of the pile driver at 2.5, and then Manning just counted 3 anyway. Guess Adius was not too keen on doing a proper job this evening. And had it not been for the interactions with Kerry and the Freebirds, and they just had Terry and Adius wrestle a cold match, I probably would have been put into a coma, especially with the amount of rest holds that took place in this 10-minute bout, but yay for wrestling angles. So after we come back from the break, David Manning is in the hot seat with Mercer to go over his recollections of the cage match. And David actually shares some insight on his interactions with Michael Hayes throughout the day, even before the match took place. And he essentially says that when Manning had talked over things with Hayes earlier in the day, he seemed to be all in with calling everything straight down the middle. But once the pay-per-view got underway, he started to notice that something was a little off with Hayes, especially when we got to the 6-man tag with Terry and David Von Erich. And by the time the cage match rolled around, the reality had set in that Michael Hayes had become power-hungry. And, well, Manning pretty much said everything except for the statement he went into business for himself, which probably would have been a no-go during this time period. Basically, he talked about how Hayes had no business getting as physically involved as he did, and once Kerry had the cage door slammed into his head, he knew that he had to call the match off because Kerry was in no condition to continue. But the big takeaway from this was that there is a contractual stipulation that guarantees Kerry a rematch for the belt against Flair, and that match will take place down the road. And I wrote this down as a joke at the end of the segment, but the more I think about it, it's not entirely untrue. David Manning might be one of my favorite wrestling referees to share stories and explain his officiating during matches. He's logical, he sounds like he actually means what he says, and he provides clear context for why he makes the decisions that he does. God, can you imagine them trying to do this shit with Rick Knox or whoever the testosterone deficient referee is? Bryce Remsburg, I think his name is. My God, that'd be a train wreck and a half. And our main event is King Kong Bundy versus the Samoan. Or I guess is he now wants to be referred to as the artist formerly known as King Kong Bundy. And Bundy was sort of the other half of the story development for the night. The big theme with him going forward is that under the jurisdiction of Devastation Inc. and The Man, Bundy is going to be an unstoppable force in world class. And we found out later in the night who The Man was that he was referring to. No, that's a lie, actually. We did not, in fact, find out who The Man was. But we did hear Bundy say that he is going to be teaming with the Great Kabuki going forward. And I guess we find out who The Man is at a later date. And I know I completely skipped over anything involving Bundy and the Samoan in this match. It sucked. Bundy won with a splash in like 3 minutes. What a great show this was, though. I mean, it's funny. The whole show is being driven by essentially one story, but goddamn is that one story not one of the best wrestling stories ever crafted by a wrestling organization. I love how authentic the character development feels with everyone involved. Everyone works their part well. We got all sides of the story regarding the cage match, both from the faces and the heels perspective. And now, basically, the number one draw for the show is eventually seeing Kerry get in the ring with either Michael or Terry in a one-on-one capacity. Tie that in with the fact that he's also got a guaranteed rematch with Flair for the NWA title to look forward to. There's a lot going on with this show right now, and the whole thing is essentially built around 5 or 6 characters. Meanwhile, we got 2 major wrestling organizations that have quadrupled the talent pool, and they don't have a fucking clue where they're heading in any direction, north, south, east, or west. And I'm not just taking a shot at AEW, that also includes WWE. But again, that's why we dig the classic content, because we can appreciate a time when the business actually knew what it was doing and was actually trying to draw money and create box office attractions. So, that'll do it for this show. Until next time, when we continue along on our retro review series. Again, make sure you all subscribe, comment, and rate the show for me. I will be back on Monday for the next edition of the show, where we delve back into some modern wrestling talk, specifically with our normal AEW Rampage and NWA Power Rundown. And I still need to find something to talk about for the final segment. Last week, I utilized the last part of the show to discuss some New Japan follow-up from the Wrestle Kingdom show. So, if I have a little bit of free time, maybe I'll try to scout the market and see if there's anything coming up this weekend that I might want to check out and watch on the indie circuit. I am yet to review a GCW show, and I know that's sort of the hot topic on the indie market right now, so maybe I'll give it a shot and see what I'm missing out on. I know I'll probably hate it because I am not a fan of the kind of content that GCW puts out there, but maybe it'll be like an AEW case where I find 1 or 2 things to talk about and I can merely gloss over the rest of the other garbage. But like I said, I will keep posted for what's going on with the indie scene this coming weekend, and if you see a third segment devoted for the Monday show, you will know that I have found something to fill in the gap. If not, we'll just stick with the usual Power and Rampage report, and maybe I'll just try to elaborate on things a little bit more to fit in that hour time slot. Until then, take care all. Peace out.